The directions that these discussions about Columbus and his Columbus Day holiday have suggested to me an idea. One could easily do a history of holidays, or a book, or a class, or a podcast. Holidays make excellent subjects for historical analysis because they're created by people who, at the time, think that these holidays are utterly and vitally important, and they create them with the intent of teaching the culture and future generations about some really important thing. Columbus Day is a good example. In the 1890s, he was a national hero. Thanks mainly to Italian Americans and American members of the Catholic Church who thought that Columbus shouldn't just be remembered for setting the world down the road that created the United States, but that he was a great man who had much to teach Americans. Now Columbus Day is pretty much just an excuse for banks and some state offices to close for a day. But holidays are, as I said, really good subjects for historical study because we tend to accept their existence, usually without question, but we really don't know the origins of the holidays or why they exist. Mother's Day is a really good example. In its original conception, it was supposed to be a true national holiday in which the United States as a whole would celebrate the contributions made to society by mothers in their work to feed, comfort, shelter, and raise the nation. Some of the loudest supporters of the holiday had very political anti-war motives, for example. There were supposed to be parades and speeches honoring the women of the nation. Instead, it quickly became a holiday about individual children thanking their individual mothers with Hallmark cards. The real political reason for the holiday quickly disappeared from memory. And Veterans Day. You know, that day we get off on November 11th, or whatever Monday or Friday happens to be convenient. Why November 11th? Because that was the day the Great War ended. The armistice, or ceasefire, ending what we now call the First World War, went into effect at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. After the war, November 11th became Armistice Day, celebrating the sacrifices made by American soldiers and Marines during the war. During the 1920s, it became an important day of commemoration. But after the Second World War, it became less relevant, particularly since the U.S. lost 5 times as many men in the Second War as in the First. So in 1954, Congress changed Armistice Day into Veterans Day, to honor all who had served, rather than it being just about the First World War. Interestingly, this Congress inserted "under God" into the Pledge of Allegiance that same month. Much the same thing has happened with war memorials, too. The Vietnam Memorial, completed in 1982, was the first national war memorial, but once that was built, everyone wanted in on the whole memorial scene. The first one was the Forgotten War, the Korean War. And the brand new National Second World War Memorial has just been completed, only a few hundred yards away from the Korean and Vietnam War memorials. And yes, there is a National Civil War Memorial in the works. And how about Labor Day? Why is Labor Day in September? Because every other country on the face of the earth celebrates Labor Day as May 1st, International Workers' Day. American politicians, however, didn't want Labor Day in America to have the same connotations of socialism and labor union organizing that International Labor Day has meant everywhere else. So we switched to September, and just gave everybody the day off, hoping nobody would want to question that decision or focus on any of the actual contributions of laboring men and women to society. Apparently it worked. And of course I'm leaving out the whole May Day, pagan festival, celebration of spring thing. And do not get me started on Valentine's Day. And lastly, Christmas. Now this one's complicated. And let's be honest, Jesus is not the historical reason for the season. What is now celebrated as Christmas existed in Europe long before the birth of Christ as a celebration of the winter solstice, the longest night, the shortest day, what is now roughly around the week of December 25th, the shortest day of the year, which marked the moment of the rebirth of the sun, where every day gets longer and longer through into spring and into summer. The Romans called it Saturnalia and celebrated the birth of the sun centuries before the birth of Jesus. The pagan tribes of northern Europe, like the Celts, celebrated the winter solstice with feasts, song, and general merriment, pretty much like our own Christmas minus the electric lights and the endless TV commercials. The German tribes celebrated it through rituals involving pine trees, evergreens that never lost their leaves, and symbolized the survival of life through the dead of winter. Oh, Tannenbaum, oh, Christmas tree. Christmas trees, Yule logs, mistletoe, singing, feasting, gifting, all that predated Christianity and our modern Christmas. When Europe was becoming Christian in the 7th and 8th centuries, ancient pagan celebrations simply got a new layer of Christianity laid over them. The celebrations of the winter solstice and the rebirth of the sun, S-U-N, became the celebration of Christmas and the birth of the sun, S-O-N. Actually, that's probably not news to most of you. You probably already knew that the Yule log, for example, is a remnant of the old non-Christian Scandinavian holiday called Yule. Indeed, some American Christians consciously celebrate Christmas without all the colorful parts because they know them to have non-Christian origins, or simply skip Christmas altogether and concentrate instead on Easter. But one might argue that the world we live in today is kind of like Christmas. Its origins reach far back and have layers and layers of meaning and tradition and ritual placed over the older layers, so that we often don't know or understand the roots of what we do. How many things have changed, sometimes quickly, sometimes at a glacial speed, to layer by layer create the world in which we live.